Today's lesson, we're going to look at a topic called giants. A friend of mine that asks Bible questions occasionally, and I'll give him the Bible answers. But recently he asked about giants because he knew about David and Goliath and wanted to know where did these giants come from. So I thought, it's a good time to look at the Old Testament and see about giants. And I even capitalized the topic today. So let's look at a couple of statements here. There were giants on planet Earth before and after the flood. So we'll start off with that to begin with. So they didn't just go away. The only way that we could have giants after the flood, or you wouldn't have David and Goliath. So we're going to find out where these giants came from. And also, in the Jesus mentioned in the book of David, but he was quoting Psalms. So the David and Goliath is actually in 2 Samuel book. And we're not even going to look at Goliath today. We're going to look at what happened with giants, not counting Goliath, that most people that have basic knowledge of the Bible know about David and Goliath, and David killing the giant with a slingshot. Okay, giants fathered children of earthly women. Okay, well that's a pretty interesting fact there. Well, this is let's start off with Genesis 6:2, because this is before the flood. Because Genesis 6 is, once you start reading in that, you'll see then the flood comes, and we already have mentioned that giants going to be here before the flood and after the flood. So keep that in mind. Let's look at Genesis. We're going to look at Genesis 6:2 and 6:4. Genesis 6:2, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So you'll hear this debate. There's always a debate on this, sons of God. Were they angels? Well, it doesn't say they were angels, but definitely they knew what was going on planet Earth and saw the creation of man, and more importantly, the creation of the female of the species. And so they saw the daughters of men because they were aware of what was going on planet Earth, and saw that they were fair, meaning attractive, were good looking. And then after this semicolon, it says here, and they, who's the they? The sons of God took them wives of all which they chose. Well, that's interesting there. I mean, whoever they chose, they could make a wife. Okay, well, you'd have to think about that for a minute, because you don't always, like in today's society, you don't always see attractive and then take them as wives. Whoever I want as a wife. It's a mutual thing. So that's interesting. It took them wives of all which they chose. Now look at this, verse 4, Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God. Okay, well, that's why that's underlined, because we looked at the sons of God up here and saw the daughters. So you get more detail here on this sons of God. So there were giants in the earth in those days, meaning the days before the flood, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Can you imagine having giants breeding here on planet Earth when most of the human beings are living to be 900 or more years, the best we can tell, because God had not shortened the years of man yet. That comes afterwards. And we have a lesson on short. and why God did us a favor by shortening our years to have less time for Satan to tempt us. So we do have, so here we can prove that we had giants in the earth from before the flood. And when the sons of God came in under the daughters of men, not daughters of giants, and they bear children to them. So the giants were end up being fathers. And the same became mighty men which were of old. So you can tell they didn't just come and suddenly die. Men of renown. Well, of course, renown means that they're famous. We've heard of them, they're famous. What they do, the reputation follows them, type of thing. That's what renown is. So the renown meaning, well, of course, if you have giants and then you have regular men that are, between 5'5" and 6'5", and then suddenly these giants come in, well, then you can imagine how society would treat these giants. Because we found out, when I mentioned a while ago about David and Goliath, the Philistines were fighting the Jews, and they got Goliath, their giant, to fight. So that would scare off the Jews. And then the rest, is history with David and his slingshot. All right, let's look. The giants had, remember, we're studying the giants and what they, how were they on planet Earth and what they did. Well, the giants had their own land. So you can imagine them coming in and taking over land and using that as their place of abode. Let's look at Deuteronomy 2:20. And the reason that has an open parent is because there's like 4 verses there before the closed parent happens. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites call them Zamzummims. So Zamzummims was the name that the Ammonites called them. So they had their own, if you want to call that their own name, whether that they're not called that by the land, but they're called that by what I'd call the common people, the one that are non-giants, and they dwelt there in old time. Okay, well that's interesting too that we're knowing. So we had up here that they were of old. We looked at that in Genesis. They were of old. And now we're looking at Deuteronomy 2:20, where it says at the old time. So it looks like the giants didn't just come and then disappear. They were here to stay, the same as fellow men. Now, what happened at the flood? Well, God utterly destroyed the earth, and you would think all the giants would have been destroyed along with everybody but Noah and his family. But we found out, hey, this is just something for you to think about. Because how would we have Goliath for David to battle with unless this giant, what we would call genes today, the genes of the giants came on after the flood. So there were giants after the flood because we can read in 2 Samuel about David and Goliath. Okay, so they had their own name, and the Ammonites called them the Zamzummims. Okay, now let's look at Joshua. That's interesting that we're going to do Joshua here because Joshua's after you had the first 5 books of the Bible, then once Moses dies, then the next book is Joshua. Okay, Joshua 12:4 mentions the giants here, and the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants. Okay. We're going to look at that word remnant here. That's going to come into play. That dwelt at Ashtaroth and at Edrei. Okay, so they had their own king. Well, that's what it looks like. It says here the coast of Og, king of Bashan. Og, king of Bashan. So they were coast of Og. So at least it showed that was the name of their country they lived in, or at least a part of the Middle East that they lived in. and king of Bashan, which was a remnant of the giants. I wanted to look at that remnant. And that's interesting that means they were after the flood, because Moses is after the flood, Moses and Joshua. And we can still see, hey, there's still giants, but they're not fully populated, because we got the word remnant there. Remnant's going to come into play again. Let's look at this. What do we mean by giants? The giant size of giants was described. So what do you mean by giants? Like, like I know of basketball players that are 7 foot tall, that some that play professionally. So to me, that would be a giant. So let's see how the giants are described in the Old Testament. Size of the giants was described. Let's look at Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king of Bashan. Well, we had that up here in Joshua, and Joshua comes after the book of Deuteronomy. So that's interesting. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Okay, we had remnant of giants here. So something happened to where there were only a few of them left. But we studied here at the beginning that they were of old, that they were mighty men, and they were of old and men of renown. And now we know where they lived. But this is interesting here, that in Deuteronomy 3:11 we mentioned for another remnant. So we had remnant in Joshua, and also in a previous book of Deuteronomy we had a remnant. So only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. What does that mean? Well, we'd know it as a bed frame, headboard and frame we have for our beds. So first of all, we know that they're sleeping like human beings. And behold, his bedstead, and that's one of the giants. I could have actually bolded that his there. Bedstead was a bedstead of iron. So that, I don't know how heavy they were. Sound like they were pretty heavy, that you need iron bed to sleep in. And then there's a rhetorical question. Is it not in Rabath of the children of Ammon? Well, we looked up here and saw this Ammonites. So you can see here how the consistency of these giants, that they lived in a particular place and they lived among the Ammonites. Okay. And we could study that as a separate topic. So they had a bedstead of iron, and is it not in Rabath the children of Ammon, with a capital I? Now, here's where we get some measurements. 9 cubits was the length thereof. The length of what? The bedstead. We can at least see what kind of bed did the giants lie in. What was the size of the bed? 9 cubits was the length thereof. Okay, so like we'll have a king or queen size bed, and the length is always longer than the width. So the 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. So let's look up most of the consensus of what I researched was 1 cubit was to about 18 inches, about 1.5 feet. So if the 9 cubits was how long the bed was, and if you did that, what would that come out to? So 1.5 feet times 9. Okay, so we were looking at about 12 foot. The bed was about 12 foot, and then 4 cubits would be what? 72 inches. So that's how wide the bed was. So there you go. That's how big the giants were. So it looks like they were close to 10, because we in our modern society, and you look at world history, giants were considered the Vikings. The Vikings uh, were the largest of the human race, and they were came in and conquered land and all, and then they eventually died out. So where you have zero or very few, at least that I know of, giants, not this size. Because you know what? If we had giants this size, they would be renowned, just like they were before the flood. We'd be talking about the giants and how big they are and what kind of athletes they make, that kind of stuff. So that just looks how just the bed that they lay in gives you an idea how big the giants were. So one cubit was about 18 inches. Now let's get on to this last part here. Moses killed giants. Well, I never heard of that. What do you mean Moses killed giants? Because that's after the flood. Huh. Moses came after the flood. Moses killed giants. Let's look at Joshua chapter 13, verse 12. All the kingdom of Og and Bashan. So we had that Og. We already know about this Og deal from these previous verses. So we had Og here and Og here, king of Bashan. So Og, the king of Bashan, was a giant. Because why? Well, because he remained. He remained the remnant of the giants. So what was the king's name of the giants? Og was king of Bashan, and he was a remnant of the giants. Okay, let's look at this Joshua 13:12. You might find this interesting. All the kingdom of Og and Bashan, which reigned in Ashtaroth and in Edrei, who remained of the remnant of the giants. For these, and then there's a colon there. Usually we stop at a colon when we're studying Bible to see what's before and after the colon. So remain means there's only a few left because what remained was a remnant. So when I have a remnant of something, I just got a piece of it left to just have a small amount of something that was much bigger. So you see how most of the population of the giants died off because one of us went up to 2 Samuel and looked at David and Goliath. I can see that Goliath was a singular giant. It wasn't like the Philistines sent a whole army full of giants to defeat the Jews. No, we just had the one giant that they used basically for intimidation so that the Israelites would lose and the Philistines could be triumphant over the Jews. And what happened is David, and just to refresh your memory, David had the faith and said, hey, what with these Philistines? We're God's people. We ought to be able to defeat them. And then if you read on, you'd see they tried to put a military uniform on David, which didn't fit. He just had his normal clothes on. He was also young. And what he was excellent at was a slingshot. And then slingshot hit the middle of the forehead and killed that big giant. So that part is usually well known among people today. Most people have heard of David and Goliath. And they'll even use that as a metaphor. You know, they'll say, hey, he's the David of, or they are the David of a situation. And what they mean by that is you overcame something that was much larger than you. Okay, so this, all the kingdom of Og and Bashan, which reigned in these two cities here, Ashtaroth and that, remained of the remnant of the giants. Now look what's after the colon here. For these did Moses smite, and smite means to kill. For these did Moses smite. How did Moses go and kill a bunch? The only thing that I remembered was David killed a giant. And here I'm looking in Joshua 13:12, and it said, for these, who's these? Well, this remnant of the giants. For these did Moses smite and cast them out. So they no longer were in Bashan in these two cities. They were all cast out. And the only reason we know that all of them weren't killed is because of what I've mentioned about David and Goliath. So I wanted to give this as a precursor on where did these giants come from and how long did they last? And by the way, how big were they? So we get a little bit today. So you notice there's not even any verses here about David and Goliath. That's a whole different topic that we could certainly do a sermon on. But we wanted to look at what happened before Goliath. So that was interesting. So we had before the flood, there were giants. After the flood, there were giants, and they had their own country and their own towns that they lived in. And then we find out there's a remnant left, that only some are left. Well, look at this after the colons. For these did Moses smite. How's Moses gonna? Moses is not a giant. How's he gonna kill a bunch of giants with God? Oh, with God's help, with God, with God you can do anything if it's righteous. So God's behind you. Who can be against you? That's what Moses had here. Moses had faith. So for these did Moses smite and cast them out. Not a lot of people know that Moses killed giants. So that's why I wanted to have this in today's lesson. So this is a pretty short lesson today, but it's interesting. It was even interesting me getting this message together because I wanted to answer the person that had a question about giants. Where did they came from, and can you tell us anything about giants before the David and Goliath that we had in 2 Samuel? And the answer is yes. Here's some verses. Hey, they came from above and said, hey, we want to breed with the beautiful women on planet Earth, and then we'll have children, and then they will be famous. They'll be renowned because why? Well, one thing, because their size. So you can imagine, just think if you had an army of giants. Well, that's why all we're seeing now is a remnant. So most of these giants were killed off. But you may not have known that Moses killed giants. We found it here in Joshua 13:12. For these, which is the remnant, did Moses smite and cast them out. So Moses defeated and killed giants before David. So I don't think a lot of people know that. So I found this pretty interesting. And that's today's lesson. Today's lesson was prepared for someone who had a question about the giants. Where did they come from? How long were they on planet Earth? And that's what we answered today with verses. So when we have Bible questions, we use Bible scriptures to answer Bible questions. That way we're ready to give an answer for someone that asks about the Bible. We'll give them an answer with the Bible. You answer Bible questions with Bible scriptures. Keep that in mind, and that's in our everyday life. Okay, well, I hope you found that interesting. That ended our lesson on giants, and there's no giants on planet Earth today, or you would know. They would be on TV every day. So these giants did exist before and after the flood, and then became a remnant. Most of them got killed off, and then we found out that did Moses smite and cast them out to whatever land they were living in. So I found that pretty interesting. Well, no wonder when you got to David and Goliath, there's only mention of the one giant, which was Goliath. And you can see here his side. When you look in 2 Samuel, you'll see plus they even mention how weapons they carried and how big they were. That not only were the giants intimidating as far as a human being goes, the fact that their weapons were also giant. That the giant's not going to use a small weapon when he can use a big weapon. So anyway, found that pretty interesting. If you want to ask us any Bible question anytime with Cyber Church of Christ, and you can contact us by email, or you can reply to these lessons that you listen to on our channel. Just remember, we love you and want you to be saved in the end. That's the whole goal of Cyber Church of Christ. Save some from the fire. We don't want to be cast into the lake of fire at the judgment day. We want to be accounted worthy and get into heaven. And come ask us about that. Hey, how can I be accounted worthy at the judgment day? And we'd be happy to go over those scriptures. Now, just to give you a hint, first of all, you'd need to be calling on the name of the Lord, which is hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. What some preachers would call it obeying the gospel. And that would get you in, at least in good stead, and then have your name written in the book of life, and then get saved in the end. So you can see here, looks like Moses cast out these giants. And so anyway, we learned a little bit today about giants, and wanted to answer the question, even if they're not Bible savvy, they could still find this lesson here interesting, and I encourage you to forward it to anyone that might want to hear about giants. So we're the Cyber Church of Christ, and we'd love to hear from you. We want you to be saved in the end.